Hey everyone, it's Future here from the attic, and today with a video gear topic. Now this is a little bit of a slippery slope, dangerous territory to talk about because people are always very opinionated about stuff like this. And there's a good chance people will call me out for doing things incorrectly and stuff like that. So let's just quickly make sure we're at least looking at things in the right set of mind. So the perspective of this video is from a solo content creator person making content about themselves and maybe gear or something. This is not a video for the crew sort of thing, or if you are filming actors or something. That's a totally different field, which I cannot talk about because I'm not experienced in that field. So this video is framed very much from a person that's willing to film themselves for the internet and entertainment and stuff. And yeah, just to make sure we're not going to get into debates about big studios and stuff like that, because that's not what this video is about. That's not the audience for this video. So if you're into that, move along. There's plenty of big content creators out there that do big video stuff. We do small video stuff. And the topic of today's video is rather small. It's actually on this camera here, which is obviously not my film camera, but we're talking about wireless follow focus systems. And maybe more particularly, we're talking about this Tilta Nucleus system. Now, obviously, this is a kind of jank setup, but that's because I only have one main camera, and therefore I have to use an old camera as a prop. That's just the way things go. So the system I want to talk to you about is a follow focus system, a wireless follow focus system. And the wireless part is kind of important in this conversation. Let's talk about some reasons why you probably don't need this if you are a smaller content creator like myself. Yet I still have one. The reason why this system is kind of not needed is because most cameras, like the camera you are watching this video on right now, have autofocus. And autofocus is, these days, pretty damn impressive. It's really quite good. The way I shoot these videos is actually I will enable autofocus on my app. I will wait for it to grab my face, then I disable autofocus and things are in focus. It's really that simple. The neat thing here is because you disable the autofocus, it won't do the breathing thing, so the background will stay nice and stable, you won't get weird distortions, and that works just fine. Now once you start to shoot some B-roll like stuff, you might get into some situations where you will just leave autofocus on and you can do unboxing stuff, move your camera in and out of subjects, and that actually most of the time it works just fine. There's really no reason to want to do that stuff manual anymore. I mean, the autofocus was basically invented to make focus pullers obsolete, so yeah, just use the system. It works quite well in almost all circumstances that you find yourself in as a solo content creator. Another reason is just the sheer price of these systems. Now, a system like this will cost you about $300, which might not seem too bad until you realize that's just the control unit and the motor. But you are not going to be able to use the system like that. You are going to need a few more parts, some sort of way to attach the motor to your lens. You are going to need some way to power this system, and probably you are going to need some sort of way to hold this system. Now, this setup I have right here, again, not my main setup, is a little bit janky. On my main camera I have a cage, I have a battery holder on the side instead of weirdly mounted on top. And just adding those components will easily add a couple of hundred extra euros to your setup, which makes it quite expensive. And it actually lands it in the sort of place where you might be able to buy a more expensive body, which will ultimately do more for you when doing video work than a system like this will. Now, aside from a way to mount this system to your camera, you might also need a monitor or a top handle, or maybe even both, because even though you have a screen on the back of your camera, once you are doing focus pulling duties, you will quickly find that this tiny little screen isn't really a good way to see whether or not things are in focus. So another expense you have to keep in mind on top of the potential cage or plate and the rods and the battery is a monitor and a handle, which again adds just a fair bit of cost. Moving this into the realm of you might as well buy a more expensive camera body with better autofocus and use that. Another thing to keep in mind is that not all lenses will work with a follow focus system. And this is more so with these wireless digital versions than just mechanical follow focus systems. Because all these systems rely on setting a start and a stop point on a lens to be able to focus through that range. Now if you're using one of the Sony E lenses, they have a focus by wire system, meaning that when you turn the focus ring, you're not actually turning the mechanics in the lens, you are turning a system which will be interpreted and that will focus it. Depending on how quickly you focus the lens, it will change where the focus points are on the rotation, so calibrating that to this system is impossible. Well, I guess it's technically not impossible, but it's near impossible. If anything, it's very hard and it will cost you a lot of extra time and grief. So when buying into a system like this, you don't just need all the attachment and stuff to make it work, you also need to make sure that your lenses are actually compatible with a system like this and will be reliable to set it up. If you're using Cine lenses, this will not be a problem because they are all designed to be used that way. Again, if you're using cinema lenses, you are probably not looking into content like this anyways, so I don't assume you are here, to be honest. But if you are, that's not really an issue. If, like me, you're using consumer grade lenses, this may very well become an issue. Once you use certain brands of cameras and certain lenses, they will not have hard stops, and it will be hard to calibrate this system. Speaking of calibration, that's another issue you will run into with this system. When you place a lens on a camera with this system attached, you need to calibrate the lens. Now again, with cinema lenses this is kind of easy because it has a auto calibrate system where you can just push the button and it will move the ring both ways until you hit a hard stop. But a lot of lenses don't have hard stops, which means you need to manually calibrate them for these follow focus systems. Now in theory, that's not a whole lot of work. You just go into the menu, you set the closest focus, you set the furthest focus, and that's about it. But it does add time to every time you swap a lens that you need to do this calibration. And every bit of time and energy is just going to add up, making the experience just a little bit less smooth. And even if you have invested all this time and money into a system like this, and you've got the right lenses, the right camera, the right hardware, batteries and everything, you still need to learn to actually use a system like this. Pulling focus is not something that's quite as intuitive, even if you're quite experienced with manual focus in photography. I used to do a lot of photography with manual focus lenses. Doing actual focus pulls on a camera is definitely a skill you need to train and you need to learn. And with these consumer lenses even more so, because they don't have linear zoom or linear focus pulls. So you can't just move it with a fixed speed, you actually need to compensate for the range between the points, and then you need to kind of speed up your motions or slow down your motions. And with a electronic system, this is more problematic than a mechanical, because with mechanical you're just directly controlling the speed with your hands. Here this system will dictate the speed of your movements, which is quite a big downside. So that's a fair few reasons why a system like this may very well not be worth it. So why buy one anyways? Well, I would say if you're going to shoot a lot of B-roll and you are going to do a lot of stylish shots where you have very specific direction and you want very specific things in focus, it might be interesting to buy a system for a follow focus because it just gives you more control over things. But I would highly recommend going for a mechanical follow focus. It's just easier, cheaper, and it works on any lens regardless of the hard stops or not. So that's a big plus side. The only sort of downside is once you start to move into filming yourself with a camera in a position where you can't reach it, because obviously if you can't reach the camera you can't use the follow focus on the camera because you can't reach it, obviously. And that's where this system comes in quite handy. And that's actually my main use case for this system. I was looking for a way to pull focus on my slider, which is behind me on the wall. And the thing with a slider is, once the camera is moving and you want to grab your lens to pull focus, you will inevitably move the camera around, which will make your footage quite shaky. So I figured a follow focus system would be the way to go. This way your camera can be on the slider and you can just pull focus from a distance, and that will make things work out. Now it turns out there are quite a few caveats with that, because if you have a moving camera with a non-linear scale, it becomes quite hard to actually nail focus like that. So that's a problem in itself. So that was an experiment that didn't quite turn out the way I wanted it. But the thing that does work really well is when you're filming yourself in weirder positions, like for instance when playing guitar or something. Now, your autofocus may do a fairly good job depending on your framing, but in some situations it has a hard time understanding what you're trying to do. And in these situations it's quite handy to be able to manually set focus while still holding the guitar in the position you are actually planning on playing it. Because that's usually the problem. When you are adjusting your camera, you will move things around to be able to reach the camera, which inevitably means that when you go back into your actual position of playing, everything will be slightly out of focus. It becomes a big guessing game. And this system has been incredibly handy for that sort of thing, where you can just sit down, set your camera in a weird angle, have a monitor, which is pretty much at that point a need, because you're not going to be able to see the screen at a distance, and you can just dial it in, put everything out of frame, play, and it works great. But that's a rather niche use case for something this expensive, and I believe there are actually cameras that have an app that allow you to manually focus using the app. And if your camera does that, this system becomes completely obsolete. So just to summarize, I would definitely not recommend buying this system as a solo content creator, especially if you have a camera that can already do remote focus. You can just as easily use that and save yourself a whole lot of money, which you can invest into a better camera, which is definitely more worth it. Now, for specific complaints about the Tilta system, let's dive into that part right now. Just to reiterate, I wouldn't recommend using a D7100 for our video. I tried, it wasn't a great fit. But it is a good showcase camera, I guess. Especially since the Nikon lenses actually have stops, although they are not hard stops, but we will run into that in a second. So let's just power it up. It should couple in a few seconds. And there it is. Now, you might notice that this unit is actually mounted upside down, and the reason for that is design flaw number 1, and that's this. Now, my first thought was this was actually wrong, and I felt like I should be able to take this NATO lock and lock it all the way close. Until I looked at the actual promo pictures, and this is actually how it's supposed to be sitting. Which means that you have this big piece sticking out, meaning that if I wanted to put it on in the correct orientation, I actually can't, because it will run into my camera body and it will run into all sorts of stuff. So that's a bit of a design oversight right from the get-go, which is always the stuff I love to see on rather expensive pieces of equipment. Less of an issue, I guess, if you're hand holding it, but it's a bit of an annoying when you have it on the side of your camera. So, problem number 1, I guess. Let's go through the calibration process for this specific lens. Let's just go into the settings. Now, this is actually one of the reasons why I bought this system, is it doesn't use an app. That does mean you give up some potential, but it also means that there's no app that can go obsolete, or issues with phones being out of date, or all that sort of stuff. That's always a big plus. Let's say it's a focus motor. Now, this is a Nikon G series lens or something. Pretty standard lens, but it's really quite impressive quality for the price. And it uses a focus system which has hard stops, but you can go through those hard stops. So the ring can still turn. Once you reach the hard stop, the focus just won't change anymore. If I were to auto-calibrate this system, it just doesn't understand that there are actually stops, because it moves with so much torque that it will over-torque the ring, meaning that it will keep spinning basically infinitely. So let's not do that. We can go into manual, and the first thing you'll notice is that even when I barely move the ring, we get a lot of movement from the focus ring, because I'm really just moving like a fraction of the entire throw of this ring. So it's really moving at a very high speed. Now if I want to accurately get this to sit at the right spot, it's going to be a bit tricky, especially since I'm sitting at a very weird angle, of course, but you really have to sneak up on it. Then you can confirm your closest focus, and you can go to infinity focus. Once again, paying very careful attention, and you can confirm, and this is now calibrated. So now when I turn it, you will see the ring is moving, and once I reach the end, it will actually stop moving. Same the other way around, and that works just fine. Now there is no infinite mode. When you're using a focus by wire system, you can't turn off the endpoints. You can turn it off with the little switch at the bottom, but it will still go to 0 and then just stop the motor. So you can't make it function like a manual focus throw, which is a bit of a problem. Another thing you might notice here is the speed, where in the previous example I could turn it like 1/4 of a millimeter. Now I need to turn it, let's just take a look from here. Basically almost 350 degrees to do a full focus pull from one end to the other end of the lens. Now this isn't much of a problem if you're doing small focus pulls, but once you start to do long focus pulls, this becomes a bit of an issue. And I actually looked it up in the explainer video, and they show this mode where you can multiply the ring, the focus ring, to make it move faster. And I've updated all the software and that function isn't there anymore. So now we have in the settings, we can go to the knob, set the focus, iris, zoom or other. That's all the settings here. Can't go any deeper, can't go up or down. You can calibrate the knob, rocker, vibration, standby, and the rocker speed. And if you're in the motor settings, focus motor settings, you can set the torque, direction and sensitivity, which is set at max right now. So this is as fast as it will move, meaning that if I want to do focus pulls while walking with this camera by myself, I will have to throw this focus 350 degrees, which is impossible to do in a smooth movement, let alone without moving your hand a whole lot and shaking the camera around. So I was really disappointed that this acceleration thing that they demoed in the video isn't actually on this unit, which I think is a real big shame, because it would be a very handy function, especially when you're using it in this kind of setup where you have it on the side of the camera. It's nice to be able to grab the top handle and this and just kind of have a full throw in like 1/4 of the ring or something. Would have been amazing, but it isn't there. Another gripe I have with this system is the information screen. Now I can't control my camera with this because I have an old camera. The main camera here I'm filming with is the A7 II. It's a full frame camera, It's the reason why I bought it, because the attic isn't that big, so I need a full frame camera, and this is the only affordable full frame camera I could get. Sadly, it's one of those cameras that Sony is kind of ignoring in all the software updates, and barely any company makes things compatible to this camera because it's an unusual choice for video cameras. That's just my burden to bear, I guess. But it's a bit annoying with things like this that I can't actually control the camera from this unit. Something to keep in mind, always check compatibility. This is something I knew, but it's still something that kind of bothers me. More annoying is this actual screen, which could be very good. Basically, concept here is if you have a lens calibrated, you can see the distance of your focus point with a bit of an indication of where infinity is and that sort of stuff. Now that's very good information to have, really. If you're trying to eyeball your focus, it's great to just be able to think, well, it's about 2 meters away, so I just set it here, and that should be roughly in the ballpark. This sort of focus guessing is something that's quite common in the industry, to get a rough idea of where you're at. But when you go into this, you actually can't really change anything. So let's say I say a lens brand. I can choose test or lens brand. Great. That doesn't help me. If I want to, for instance, do a user lens, add a lens. Let's say I want a, oh, well, that's a lot. 58mm lens. I want to save this. And to this day, I haven't been able to actually get this to work in any way. There also isn't added lens successfully. Great, I have no idea what I just added. There isn't much information on this procedure or how to properly set this stuff up. Also, it doesn't take into account the sensor size of the camera, which is odd, or it's one of those values that just isn't explained in the camera for some reason. I don't know. It's really a shame. It's basically a useless screen. I couldn't find anything about it on the manual or on the website. There's also this little thing called download lenses. Let's see. Lens, download, just an empty list. Also, when it's connected to the internet, doesn't matter. And you also can't search for lens brands or anything. So I don't know if this is a feature that's just not completed, but considering the system is already a bit older, it's just weird that it isn't there. Moving back a little bit to the calibration. You saw how quickly the wheel was moving. I can't, for the life of me, get it to ever move that fast again. Even at max sensitivity, it just won't move that fast. And the problem with it moving that fast in calibration is that it will overpower any non-hard stop lens. So if you have a lens like this that has stops, which you can definitely feel when manually focusing the lens, this system will 100% overpower it just due to the torque and speed it uses during that calibration process. And you can't actually change that. So you can't say, calibrate this lens, but instead of trying to do it within 1 second, just take 5 or 6 seconds and move slowly until you feel something and then go the other way around. It doesn't do that. And that's a real shame, because for many people I think lenses like these are much more common than the expensive cine lenses. Just makes it less useful. One very nitpicky sort of thing that just bothers me is when this unit goes empty. It will give a nice little warning, which is great. You can turn it off and you can plug it into the power, but it actually won't indicate that it's charging. So to double check if you're actually charging the unit, you need to turn it on to see that there's a battery indicator that's actually charging. I think that's just a stupid UI thing, which you should obviously have some sort of indicator that is actually charging. It's a small thing, but still at this kind of price point, that's just something that should be there. Speaking of engine torque, by the way, plenty, haven't had any issues with it. At high torques, I think it can easily pull any lens that is consumer grade. Videos about more professional grade lenses seem to be working as well, so that's not much of an issue. Now, one thing that's probably once again a complaint on my end that I would love to see on this tier of gear, because again, this isn't like a super cheap unit or anything, and the company behind this, Tilta, I had never heard of it, but it's apparently pretty respected in the field. There seem to be quite a few bigger content creators pushing this stuff, claiming they use it on a daily basis, but one of those features that I miss, which seems incredibly obvious, is a way to calibrate this to non-linear lenses. And this could be as easy as just a system where you can set it to the scale and then press a button and say this is so much meters, and then move it to the next one, press a button and say this is so much meters, so you can make a exponential curve in your wheel. So when you turn it, it will actually be a linear motion to turn the wheel and a exponential motion on the focus wheel. And this is, for instance, important with, well, again, non-linear scale lenses, consumer lenses, but also macro lenses, which tend to have most of their range in the close focus and barely any range in long focus. They are basically impossible to focus with this system in a reliable way, which is a real shame. Once again, it's a fairly expensive product, so a functionality like that, which is purely software, should be doable for this company, I think. And that's my list of complaints about the Tilta Nucleus system. Yeah, it isn't everything I had wished it to be. Now, obviously, when you watch a lot of bigger channels with big productions with very specific cinema gear, they have the cinema gear mindset, the cinema gear stuff, and that all probably integrates better than my consumer grade gear. At the same time, I don't think it's that weird to expect a company that isn't charging cinema prices to attract some consumer gear people like me and other content creators, which might look at this system and be like, okay, it's a little bit expensive, but it's still within my kind of I can afford this range, and I want something professional, but I can't buy cinema cameras and all that other stuff. It still seems sort of like a reasonable thing to want to buy, although in hindsight it turns out that it apparently isn't. So that's my experience with this system. I will keep it because I already bought it, and it's kind of useful for shots where you're in awkward positions and you want to film yourself. But from a sensible point of view, I would say this is definitely one of those systems that for a consumer single crew content creator is definitely not something you should be spending money on. That's it for this video. Bit of a bummer, but well, it is what it is. See you in the next one.